Here are 6 strong, logically progressive key points for your speech. India begging America to come, to boycott India. Crafted in the same tone and structural style we've been using in your previous prompts, with a balance of intellectual depth, psychological insight, and persuasive clarity. 1. The illusion of strength versus the reality of dependence. How nations often project power to the world, yet behind the scenes rely heavily on alliances and foreign approval, revealing cracks in the facade of self-reliance. The politics of image management. Why political leadership focuses more on global perception than on addressing domestic flaws, and how this creates a culture of seeking validation from powerful nations. Economic leverage and political vulnerability. Understanding how foreign investment, trade dependencies, and sanctions become silent tools of control, and why some countries fear being cut off from them. The psychology of begging in international relations. Why a country with resources and manpower might still resort to pleading for support, and how this undermines national dignity on the world stage. 5. Boycotts as a weapon of influence. The real impact of coordinated boycotts, economically, politically, and symbolically, and how they shift the balance of negotiation power. 6. Self-respect as the foundation of true independence. Why no nation can truly stand tall until it stops performing for external approval and starts making decisions rooted in internal strength rather than fear of isolation. If you'd like, I can now expand key point 1 into a 500-word segment in the same Mel Robbins-inspired delivery style we've been using for your previous speeches. Economic power is often spoken of as the backbone of national strength, but the truth is, economic dependency can be just as dangerous as economic weakness. A country may boast of its GDP growth, its expanding industries, and its thriving markets. But if that growth is built on the foundation of foreign investment, foreign technology, and foreign approval, then it is not solid ground, it is a rented platform. And when you are standing on something that doesn't truly belong to you, you are always at risk of it being pulled away. When a nation's trade routes, supply chains, or critical industries are tied too tightly to another power, that power becomes the silent hand that can tighten or loosen the rope. This isn't just about economics, it's about influence. When you rely heavily on another country to sustain your economy, you are also giving them the ability to shape your decisions. And history has shown, time and again, that the one who holds the resources often holds the reins. This is where the danger lies. Economic dependence erodes sovereignty, not in one sudden collapse, but in small, almost invisible compromises. A government might alter a policy to keep a trading partner happy. It might avoid taking a moral stance on an issue for fear of losing investments. It might even reshape its domestic priorities just to align with the expectations of foreign powers. Each decision feels small in isolation, but collectively they form a chain. And the more links you add, the harder it becomes to break free. The problem is dependency is comfortable until it isn't. As long as the relationship is smooth, the benefits are obvious. Foreign capital flows in, industries grow, people see progress, but the comfort is deceptive because it hides the imbalance of power. It's only when the relationship strains, when the partner makes demands or withdraws support, that the reality becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the so-called independence feels fragile and the economic growth feels more like a leash. A truly powerful nation invests in self-reliance, not isolation. It builds domestic capacity, nurtures innovation, and secures diverse partnerships so that it is never at the mercy of a single ally or adversary. Because when a country can stand economically without leaning too heavily on another, its voice in the global arena is no longer shaped by fear, it's shaped by choice. So the real measure of economic strength is not how big the numbers look in a report, but how free a nation is to act in its own interest without worrying about who it might upset. And if a country has to think twice before speaking its truth because it fears losing someone's financial favor, then its economy isn't a foundation, it's a bargaining chip. True economic power is the ability to walk away from the table and still stand tall. Diplomatic pressure is rarely about loud threats or public ultimatums. More often, it operates in the shadows, in private meetings, in subtle suggestions, in the quiet shifting of alliances. Nations have learned that it is far more effective to shape behavior through influence than to force it through open confrontation. And the most potent form of influence is dependency. If a country needs you for trade, for security, for political backing, then you don't have to raise your voice. They'll hear you in every decision they make. When diplomatic pressure builds, it usually comes disguised as advice, partnership, or mutual interest. But if you strip away the polite language, what you're really looking at is leverage. And leverage doesn't just shape international relations, it rewrites them. The nation applying pressure often frames its demands in the language of cooperation, yet the underlying message is clear. We control something you can't afford to lose. Whether that's military support, market access, or even international legitimacy, the power dynamic is set. This is why countries that appear strong on paper can still find themselves bending to the will of others. They aren't just making diplomatic choices, they're making survival choices. And survival has a way of silencing even the boldest voices. When a government fears losing the favor of a powerful partner, it may choose inaction over action, silence over truth, and compliance over resistance. It may even defend the very policies it disagrees with, simply because the cost of disagreement feels too high. Diplomatic pressure doesn't only affect foreign policy, it seeps into domestic policy too. Leaders start shaping their laws, trade deals, and even their public statements to maintain favor abroad. Over time, a nation can begin to look less like an independent actor and more like an extension of another country's strategy. And the most dangerous part, this can happen without the citizens fully realizing it because the changes come gradually and they are wrapped in the language of diplomacy. The truth is, a country cannot claim full sovereignty if its political decisions are dictated, even indirectly, by another power's approval or disapproval. The measure of a nation's freedom is in its ability to say no and mean it without fearing collapse. That requires more than strong leaders. It requires strong systems, diversified alliances, and the courage to withstand short-term discomfort for long-term independence. Diplomatic pressure will always exist. It's part of the game. But the nations that thrive are the ones that play it without becoming someone else's pawn. They understand that relationships are valuable, but self-respect is priceless. And in the world of international politics, the ability to stand your ground is the only real test of who's truly in control. Because at the end of the day, if your sovereignty can be negotiated, it was never sovereignty at all. When a nation's public image starts to slip on the global stage, the ripple effects can be far more dangerous than they appear at first glance. Reputation in international politics is currency. It determines whether other nations trust you, whether investors see you as stable, and whether global organizations give you a seat at the table or quietly sideline you. And the truth is, once that image begins to crack, the fall from influence can be faster than anyone expects. In the digital age, perception moves at the speed of light. One policy misstep, one international controversy, one human rights violation, and suddenly the narrative isn't yours anymore. It's being written by foreign media, amplified by rival nations, and cemented in the minds of people who have never even visited your country. And once the story is set, changing it is a monumental task. We've seen this with countries that have tried to rebrand themselves diplomatically. Some succeed over decades, but most discover that the world has a long memory. The erosion of global image doesn't just damage prestige, it has concrete consequences. Trade partners may hesitate, investors may pull back, tourism might decline. And in politics, hesitation is often the first step toward isolation. Isolation, in turn, creates desperation. That's when we see countries making frantic attempts to win back favor, sometimes even compromising their own values or bending their policies to appease larger powers. It becomes less about what is right for their citizens and more about what will make them look better in the eyes of others. The irony is that in trying so hard to rebuild their image, some nations dig themselves into deeper trouble. They make symbolic gestures without addressing the underlying issues. They chase foreign approval instead of internal reform, and the world can see right through it. True respect on tongue. The global stage isn't won through polished press releases or carefully staged diplomatic visits. It's earned through consistent, principled action that stands the test of time. If a nation's leadership fails to recognize this, they risk becoming trapped in a cycle where they are constantly reacting to outside judgment instead of setting their own course. This is the ultimate loss of agency, when your policies are no longer driven by your vision but by your fear of being disliked. And that fear is a poor strategist. It doesn't build, it only patches. It doesn't inspire, it only pleases. Global respect isn't something you can beg for. It's something you command through integrity, stability, and clarity of purpose. And once you've lost it, the only way to get it back is by doing the slow, hard work of real change, the kind of change that makes you worth listening to again. Because in the end, the world doesn't truly love those who chase approval. It admires those who stand so firmly in their truth that others have no choice but to respect them. Economic dependency is one of the most subtle yet dangerous traps a nation can fall into. On paper, it can look like progress, more trade deals, more foreign investments, more financial partnerships. But beneath the surface, if the balance of that relationship tilts too far in one direction, it stops being a partnership and starts becoming a dependency. And dependency, whether for a nation or for an individual, means vulnerability. When a country's economy relies heavily on one or two foreign partners, it essentially places its own stability in someone else's hands. If that partner decides to pull back, impose sanctions, or simply demand concessions in exchange for continued support, the dependent nation has little leverage to push back. This is how sovereignty is eroded without a single soldier crossing a border, through economic pressure that quietly dictates political choices. We've seen it time and time again, nations compromising on key policies, not because they believe it's the right thing to do, but because they can't afford to say no. And when a country reaches that point, it's no longer in control of its destiny. It's like a business so reliant on a single customer that losing them means bankruptcy. You stop innovating for yourself and start producing whatever that customer demands. The real danger is that economic dependency rarely happens overnight. It creeps in quietly, disguised as opportunity. Leaders celebrate new foreign investments, infrastructure funding, and favorable trade terms without considering the long-term consequences of tying their economy so tightly to external forces. By the time the dependency becomes clear, the exit options are few and costly. This is why economic resilience, diversification, self-reliance, and the development of domestic industries isn't just a matter of financial prudence. It's a matter of national security. A country with multiple strong trade partners, a thriving internal market, and the capacity to produce its own essentials can negotiate from a position of strength. It can engage with the world without being beholden to it. There's also a psychological layer here. Dependency breeds a mindset of appeasement. Leaders start thinking less about what's best for their people and more about what will keep the foreign money flowing. And the public, whether they realize it or not, begins to absorb the idea that their prosperity is something that must be granted from the outside rather than built from within. That is perhaps the most dangerous cost of all, when a nation forgets its own capacity to stand on its own feet. If a country wants to be respected, it must ensure that its prosperity is not rented but earned. It must build an economy that can withstand the ebb and flow of global politics without losing its footing. Because the day you rely on someone else to feed you is the day you hand them the power to starve you. Reputation on the global stage is like trust in a personal relationship. It takes years to build, but it can be destroyed in a single moment of weakness or poor judgment. A nation's image is not just about its culture, economy, or military might. It's about the perception others have of its strength, integrity, and independence. And once that perception shifts from a nation that stands tall to a nation that bends easily, the ripple effects are profound. When other countries see a government repeatedly pleading for support, making concessions under pressure, or aligning its decisions with the preferences of stronger powers, they begin to recalibrate how they deal with it. Negotiations become tougher, respect becomes conditional, and the space to act independently on the world stage begins to shrink. This is the silent cost of losing control over one's narrative. Decisions stop being guided by vision and start being driven by fear of losing approval or aid. The global arena is not sentimental, it's transactional. Every alliance, every handshake, every summit carries an unspoken calculation. What do I gain and what might I lose? When a country is perceived as desperate or dependent, the balance of that calculation tilts against them. Even those who extend help may do so with strings attached, knowing the other side has little choice but to comply. What's often overlooked is how quickly this loss of standing can spiral. Once a reputation is tarnished, other nations begin to treat it as a precedent. If one powerful ally can extract concessions, why wouldn't others try? Before long, a country that once prided itself on its independence finds itself in a cycle of compromise, unable to take bold stances or defend its own principles without fearing economic or political backlash. Restoring credibility on the world stage is a slow, deliberate process. It requires consistent action, not just declarations of strength. It means investing in domestic capacity so decisions are made from a place of self-reliance, not dependency. It means setting clear boundaries in foreign relations and having the courage to enforce them. And most importantly, it means prioritizing the long-term dignity of the nation over the short-term comfort of appeasing others. In the end, a country's true power is not measured by how loudly it speaks when it is backed by allies, but how firmly it stands when it must speak alone. Global respect is not something that can be demanded. It is earned day by day through choices that signal strength, consistency, and an unshakable commitment to self-determination. Because here's the truth. Once the world believes you can be swayed, they will try. But once they believe you cannot be moved, they will think twice before testing you.